everybody. So this week is where things get interesting. So last time we introduced what is Jewish philosophy, which was kind of, gentle introduction. Today, less gentle, taking on the small, topic, God. A few preliminaries, right? So two things I think that are important to say at the outset. One is something we ended with last time, but is worth emphasising now, which is that when it comes to Jewish philosophy and Jewish thought in general, there are very few party lines, right? So unlike, say, halacha, where there are things you must do and things you can't do, right? When it comes to the theological and philosophical systems that Jewish thinkers have put forward to understand this stuff, they actually vary wildly. They disagree with each other completely. So there's always, more than one view. And what we'll do tonight is look at a couple of views, at least two, right? Such that if there's one you don't like, you might like the other, or you might like neither of them, and there'll be another one that maybe we don't get to that will be out there, right? So that's just important to know. And some of the views, even those that are given by people we're dealing with, right? So given the context here, right, we're at an Orthodox shul, all the philosophers that I am going to use throughout the time that we are together are all going to be, people within Orthodox tradition or kind of Rishonim, whatever, right? So, won't be getting into, Buber and Spinoza, people like that. It's all going to be, right, people who are, within our form of Judaism. But even they say things that are not mainstream, right? That doesn't mean they're unacceptable. It means they're not mainstream, right? So some of these thinkers, even thinkers for whom we have the greatest respect and all of that, and are really significant within the Orthodox tradition, right? Even they say certain things when it comes to philosophy that, some people were surprised by, right? And I'm going to make this is the one exception where I will mention somebody, Jewish philosopher, not religious Orthodox and not often cited in a Jewish context, and that's Marx, right? Marx once allegedly was at a soiree at a party and was trying to impress a young lady and gave a kind of old spiel and said, those are my principles, and if you don't like them, I got others, right? Groucho Marx, by the way. And that's kind of Jewish philosophy, right? Genuinely. As in, Rambam says that I don't like it. Well, that's okay. Yehuda Halevi said something completely different, right? So it's just important as a setup to be aware that there are, more than one view, and some of the views, even when we're confining ourselves as we are, right, to orthodoxy, are not mainstream, right? There you've got, oh, really? Gosh, that's surprising. But that's why, most of the great Jewish philosophers, even the frum ones, right, Rambam, Rav Kook, Rabbi Sachs, were all threatened with cherem in their lifetimes at one time or another, okay? So that's just the nature of the beast, right? So that's the trigger warning. It's very trendy these days to give them, okay. All right? Okay, so let's talk about God, right? And let's start off with here's Jewish monotheism, right? And this is actually very important because the way that, all denominations of Judaism, right, like to tout monotheism, right? We discovered monotheism. We're the first monotheists. Avraham Avinu, the first monotheist, and all of that. But what is monotheism, right? Because most people think, monotheism is one God, right? So there used to be pagan beliefs in lots of gods, the god of the wind and the god of the lightning, all these different, in the Greek pantheon of Greek gods.
You can define it simply as one is not two, or more.
Yeah, exactly, right? So it's one God. But actually, in Jewish thought, a lot of thinkers, and Rambam kind of primary amongst them, says, no, that's not what Jewish monotheism is. that would be monolatry. As in, look, they've got lots of gods and they're powerful and they're knowledgeable and all of this, and we say, no, there's only one of those, right? Rambam says, no, that's not monotheism. Jewish monotheism is, no, our God isn't that type of thing at all, right? He's not to be understood as an angry man in the sky, right? That's not, for these philosophical thinkers, how to understand monotheism, right? To say there's one God, when we say Hashem Echad, right, daily in the Shema, it actually means something different, something much more than that. And this is something that was really central to Rambam, who is our first couple of texts tonight. All right? So here's the first text from the Rambam, who says the following, right, from first part of the Guide of the Perplexed. So this is just at the end there, 150, 111. So it's part 1, chapter 50, page 111 in this edition, right? And all the references are to that. It will be part, chapter, page number in the Pinez translation. Okay, so Jewish monotheism. If, however, writes Rambam, you belong to those whose aspirations are directed toward descending to that high rank, which is a rank of speculation, and to gaining certain knowledge with regard to God's being one, by virtue of a true oneness, so that no composition whatever is to be found in him, and no possibility of division in any way whatever, then you must know that he may be exalted has in no way and in no mode any essential attribute. And that just as it is impossible that he should be a body, it is also impossible that he should possess an essential attribute.
What is an essential attribute?
Right, so, it's a good question. We're going to pause there to explain what on earth is he talking about here, right?
The different attributes, the different sferot, the different,
right.
Yudke Vavke, Kel, Loka, all that is not...
No, but what is an essential attribute?
So an essential attribute would be, let's go through what is he saying here, right? So number one is he's saying, to really understand what it means God is one. Doesn't mean there's one, not lots. Of course there's one. That we know, right? But that one God is one. He is a unity, as he puts here, no composition, right? As in every single thing in existence that we know of is composed of parts, right? And therefore, it can decompose because you can break the parts off, right? You can break it down. So when we're talking philosophically about the oneness of God, their idea is, no, God's not like that. God is this perfect unity. He's not made up of bits that you can kind of take off because he can't decompose, right? God exists, and not the way we exist. We happen to exist just because our parents happen to have, born us. God doesn't just happen to exist, right? God exists necessarily, right? God's existence isn't because, just one day he popped into existence, right? It's essential existence, right? And that means he's not something that comes into existence and goes out of existence, which means he's not made of bits that can break up so that he can decompose. So the oneness of God is this idea of a unity. God is a unity, not made up of parts, all right? And that, of course, means something that everybody gets. He's not physical, right? It's not a physical thing. All physical things are made up of parts, right? And that's why, and the word they use here is corporeality, right? God is incorporeal. He's not a bodily thing, and therefore he's a unity. Those two are two sides of a coin, right? If you're a unity, you're not made up, you can't be physical. And if you're not physical, then you're not composed of parts.
But in English, unity means one unit of parts.
Yeah, correct.
English is not the right.
It's not the best.
Not the right term.
Yeah, it's not. So it's used in this kind of as a philosophical term, kind of technological term here by philosophers to mean this thing not composed of parts. God is a perfect unity.
What does it mean? So what is an essential attribute?
Right. So then, what's an essential attribute? Right. Well, think about the attributes we usually associate with God. Right. So God is, eternal. God is all-knowing. Right? These are the things we say. Yeah, as soon as you define God, then he's all-powerful, he's all that stuff. Right? All the things that philosophers like to say about God, and even non-philosophers like to say about God. But what Rambam's saying is, no. Can't even have those. Because if he has those, then those are parts that make him up. And he's not a perfect unity.
In other words, the perfect unity cannot have any qualities?
It cannot have any separable qualities. Right? So there's a sense in which, and the way that they talk about it is that the way we talk about God are human perception of the way he happens to be interacting or the way we're understanding him now. But in God, it's not like different bits, right? It's all a perfect unity, right? That's monotheism.
In other words, in the sense that if you said that God would say has some sort of quality like being omniscient or omnipresent, then you're saying those are different, which would interfere with the principle of unity.
They're parts and they're put together, and that can't be, right?
So when there is Rambam, what use said that Yud-Kei Vav-Kei is Rachamim and Elohim is Din, that doesn't exist. So
Not
the
as
13
literally
attributes that
different
we have,
parts, correct.
Doesn't exist.
Nope. That is for Rambam. Okay, so this isn't. We'll get to other people who would disagree, right?
Yeah, the Chavot Levavot, he actually says that the when we describe God in those terms, it's just a metaphor for us to understand how he interacts with us, but it doesn't describe his essential being.
Right. So it's kind of a mitzidenu mitzidah type of idea, right? The way we see things, they present to us in a certain way,
right.
but if it, from God's perspective, so to speak, right, it's not like that, right? This is how we perceive God, right? So that kind of language is more about how we interact with God rather than what God's like, right?
But even if the Hasidut itself, like, okay, there's, as you said, there is all those elements of God, but then there's always like a transcendent world to it. Like there is like
Correct.
until you get to the point of Asunut Ma'ut, which is exactly what the Rambam says.
Yeah, absolutely. But he does go a little further, right, in terms of what the implications of this for the Rambam are very specific in a way that differ from other people, right? So we understand what it means now. God is one. Lefi Rambam, right? Okay. So no essential. And he goes on to say, if, however, someone believes that he is one, but possesses a certain number of essential attributes, and this is very kind of horrific. He says in his words that he is one, but believes him in his thought to be many. This resembles what the Christians say, namely that he is one, but also three, and that the three are one. Right? So Rambam genuinely thinks if you really do believe in these different attributes, that's not monotheism. Right? That is, for him, a form of, as we'll see, actually idolatry.
So it means, according to the Rambam, this is the only right way of understanding the mitzvah of Yichud Hashem.
Yes,
Oneness of Hashem.
correct.
And if you
Correct.
understand it differently, whether for lack of knowledge or lack of education or just primitive thinking, so then it's not just you're not doing the mitzvah properly, you're just actually doing that.
It's a problem, yeah. And that's why in the guide, and he says this a number of times, right? He says, look, this book isn't for everyone, and we're going to talk about very obscure things. But this one, right, he says on number 8, this thing, to believe that God is one and not bodily, is something that everybody has to be taught. Kids, right, anyone. And yeah, they might not fully comprehend what it means, but everybody needs to know this, because this is essential.
It's interesting because this is a part of his famous Machlokas with the Ravid.
Yep. Well, the Ravid in his Hasagot exactly picks him up on it.
Well,
correct.
no, but the Ravid doesn't argue this is true. He just
No.
He just says that if you
believe that, okay.
if you believe in God's corporeality,
Correct. It's like Gegas and hate, but it's not true.
No, you're
Correct.
primitive, right?
Correct.
And
It's
Correct.
a contradiction, by the way, of having all those attributes into one unity.
Yeah.
Because the appearance of how it comes, so the revelation is different. So you need to believe that he's one.
Yeah.
No parts to it, one. But he may reveal himself. Sometimes it's this, sometimes it's that.
That's
Not
not-
parts.
yeah.
It's just the way that we
Correct. The way we
understand it.
perceive and
There's no
understand.
contradiction between
Yeah.
that and the attributes.
So, well, we'll see, though. The Rambam goes further, right? And this is where what he says was deemed to be by certain people, including the Ravid, in his day. So this isn't kind of... It's very important to understand with Rambam the kind of critiques that we'll be seeing of his, or if you're not comfortable with what he's saying, that's not some kind of wishy-washy modern liberal thing, right? In his own day, people got very upset by this, and that's why they burnt his book, right? There was big controversies, concerning it. But, this is one view. There are others, and we'll see them. So don't, Don't worry if this one doesn't suit. So he goes on, similar to this, the assertion of him who says he is one but possesses many attributes, that his attributes are one, while he denies at the same time his being corporeal, believes in his absolute simplicity, as if what we aimed at and investigated were what we should say and not what we should believe. Right? So he's saying, look, you have to believe in this complete and utter unity, and more than that, if you don't, as he goes on to say in the next excerpt, know accordingly, you who are that man, that when you believe in the doctrine of the corporeality of God, or believe that one of the states of the body belongs to him, you provoke his jealousy and anger, kindle the fire of his wrath, are a hater, an enemy, an adversary of God, hold on, much more than an idolater. Worse than idolatry. Now, as you've picked up, right? Hang on, he's just said anger, and isn't that the same thing, right? This is why the guide is written in a very specific pedagogical fashion, because this is chapter 36, and what we just read is chapter 50, right? As in chapter 30, he's still using those terms. As he goes on a few chapters later, he explains what he means by those terms, so that you will interpret them if you read the book again and say, oh yeah, but I know he doesn't mean that, right? So this is where it's a very complex work. You've got to link all the bits together, and he tells us this. He says at the beginning, he says, look, things might appear to be out of order, and but that's because you have to go gently, right? And you have to kind of lead people in stages, right? So that's oneness of God. Yeah.
I'm sorry, it looks to me that it's very similar to what Adam the top wall. It's about the same description about it, that we could say nothing about it.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of, that idea. Now, the difference is that Rambam kind of sticks with that and doesn't want to start with the descent through the various sphirot that do manifest, right? As we'll see.
Because it's not so nice.
Because exactly, precisely. All right. So let's go on. So, what this actually means, or the way this is understood, is in terms of what we call divine transcendence. That God transcends our world. He's completely other, right? Not like us at all. Completely other than the world, right? And for Rambam, very importantly, that means we shouldn't be describing him like he's Superman, right? Our tendency is to understand God kind of like Superman, right? Well, we have knowledge, yeah? Some. Well, God has way more of it. And we have power. Some. God has way more, right? God is all-powerful, all-knowing, all of it, right? This is what we say. The problem is, that just makes God a better version of us. That's not monotheism, that's not transcendence.
Using those terms, Chon,
correct.
All that is in the Torah.
He does indeed, right? And right, so the question is, so why does it do that? And Rambam deals with that, because you're absolutely right. Isn't that what he does, right? So, what the Rambam therefore says, and this is very famous, he goes on to say here, B, and this is 156. So here is where he's getting into the real kind of, meat of his philosophy regarding how to understand God. Right? And he says, know that likeness is a certain relation between two things. And that in cases where no relation can be supposed to exist between two things, no likeness between them can be represented to oneself. Right? So, two things can be related in some way if they're alike in some way. Right?
Big object, small object.
Otherwise not. Yeah, big, small, relative, right? Big, small, right? Similarly, in all cases where there's no likeness between two things, there's no relation between them. An example of this is that one does not say that this heat is like this colour, or that this voice is like this sweetness. This is a matter that is clear in itself. Accordingly, in view of the fact that the relation between us and him, may he be exalted, God, is considered as non-existent, I mean the relation between him and that which is other than he, follows necessarily the likeness between him and us should also be considered non-existent. Right? God is nothing like us. Nothing. And therefore...
Yet we are him.
Sorry, yeah, we are.
We are him.
We are. So, not according to Rambam.
Excuse me. If he's all one universe and there's anything else in the world aside of him, then he's Metzumtzam. There is no such thing.
Right, yeah.
He's everything and anything and that's it, inclusive of all.
Not according to Rambam. According to Rav Kook, who we're coming to, absolutely. Right? But not according to the Rambam. Right? So this is where? This is transcendence. Right? Because you're thinking there in terms of, well, God takes up space and they've got to find a space for us. But no, that isn't that to corporealize God and see him in terms of our... That's what Rambam's trying to get away from. Right? It's not heresy. It's not... Rambam doesn't like it, but lots of others do. Yeah. But that's kind of the key point here, right? He has a very, very different understanding of it. And he's saying, no, that's those... As soon, and this is kind of his problem with language about God. As soon as we start talking about it, we get in trouble. We start getting into a mess, right? God is all-powerful. So, the favourite thing there is, therefore, can God create a rock too heavy for himself to lift, right? So as soon as you start using human terminology to talk about it, you end up tying yourself up in knots, right? God can do anything. Can he lie?
He did.
Right, so...
He did lie in two places.
Right, so, well, again...
In Bereshit and Masechet Sota.
So...
Many times in Masechet, for every time that there was a Sota.
Exactly, but this is exactly where Rambam's going to say that's why you can't interpret that language literally, right? So this is where you get very different, and it's kind of how I started, right?
Please God, I don't mean that way.
Yeah.
But I'm
Yeah.
using what it says.
100%, right? And it's important, what it says is important to him because it establishes the existence of God. But once you've got that settled, for Rambam, and again I stress for Rambam, right? Plenty of people disagree with him, right? But for Rambam, what you have to then do is go through and he'll tell you what these words are, how to understand these words when applied to God, right? But you can see why he was deemed, some of his views were deemed controversial, right? Okay. So, as he says on the next page, there is in truth no relation in any respect between him and any of his creatures. For relation is always found between two things falling under the same necessarily proximate species, whereas there's no relation between two things if they fall merely under the same genus, right? So there's no relation, right? Now there is a relation of us to him, right? It's talking about him to us, right? Whether we are to conceive of God as like looking at us and thinking about, in those kinds of terms, we have to get away from that perspective according to Rambam, right? But obviously we do use language about God all the time, and so does he in his own book, right? So what do you do about the Torah itself? So for Rambam, he starts the guide by giving us basically a lexicon, right? What does this word mean? Well, it means this, but with God it doesn't mean that, it means something else, right? So here's an easy example. Ro'eh, right? If you use ra'ah, that root to see. And Rambam shows, look, in Tanakh it doesn't always mean literal see. It's sometimes, if I say to you, I see, that means I understand, right? We use that all the time. The Tanakh use it all the time. So, says Rambam, so when it's about God, it's not about him seeing. It's meant to kind of indicate understanding, something non-physical, right? So he goes through this whole thing, but ultimately, what he really thinks is, here in this second one on the back sheet, these subtle notions that very clearly elude the mind cannot be considered through the instrumentality of the customary words, which are the greatest among the causes leading unto error. For the bounds of expression in all languages are very narrow indeed, so that we cannot represent this notion to ourselves except through a certain looseness of expression. Right? Language is limited, because language is something that evolves in human society. And we use it, and it's very well suited to deal with our world. It's not so well suited to apply to something as completely transcendent as God.
Use words, Lashon HaKodesh, to create a word.
Again,
again, he
That's
defines those words.
That's mitzidenu. That doesn't reflect the truth. That's just a perception. That's what the Rambam will tell you.
What the Rambam is saying is that's how you get across to us human beings, right? God can't kind of speak God-like to us because we wouldn't understand it, right? We don't have the capacity for infinite understanding. So, and in this case, it's a version of Simsum, if you like. He has to kind of contract self to human understanding such that the words used are to indicate stuff so we can understand, well, God isn't the same as the world because he's creator, it's creation and all of that. But it's to indicate, as he says here, with a certain looseness of expression.
So that's how the Rambam is going to answer the famous question about predestination versus free will.
Yes.
Because knowledge is used.
Yes, knowledge is
we use.
correct.
The reason why we have a problem because we use knowledge as we.
Correct. Right. So when he does the knowledge free will problem, that's exactly how he deals with it. Which is, he said, when we say God knows, the only relation between that word God knows and the word I use when I say Daniel knows is that they look the same when they're written on paper. The meaning, nothing to do with each other. It's like bank and bank. The bank of a river and the bank on the high street where you get money. Right? Same letters, same word, look same, don't mean the same at all.
There's an evidence to that truth because Moshe, even who spoke to Hashem all the time with the human conversation, right?
Yeah.
And he says, "Lo yarena adam chai."
Correct. Yeah.
So he also asked. I
Absolutely.
don't understand certain things. Can you explain to me what?
Yeah, but as you'll see in a moment, Rambam would question that, as we'll see. All right. So the ultimate for Rambam here, as he says, guide 130, it's not 135, that's a mistake. It should be 159, but anyway. Silence is praise to thee, to Tehillim, right? This is most perfectly put phrase regarding this matter. For of whatever we say intend to magnify and exalt, on the one hand we find it can have some application to him may be exalted, on the other we perceive in it some deficiency. Accordingly, silence and limiting oneself to the apprehension of the intellects are more appropriate. Right? The most appropriate way to actually think about God is silence, not to use language at all. Now, we can't do that, right? We're human beings. That's why we've got to fill up, right? But he says, and he quotes the famous, the Gemara in Brachot with Rabbi Chanina, and the Shalei Sibor gets up, and he says, you've got to kick him off the bimah. How dare you? You can use those words. Why? Because Moshe Rabbeinu did an Unshaken Es Agdolah said we can. But they don't mean anything, really, and you certainly can't start adding any more. Right? That's absolutely out. So that's what, we have ways that we need to express ourselves in terms of how we relate to God. And that's, therefore, we've got tefillah. But don't take it literally for Rambam. Right? For Rambam. So this is the most extreme version of God as transcending reality, our reality, completely transcendent. Right? And Rambam is the most extreme on this, by the way. Many introductions to philosophy of religion that have nothing to do with Judaism, they're just philosophy of religion, right? So people do philosophy of religion, talking about these kinds of things, right? And none do Judaism. They have a section on Moses Maimonides, right, to discuss this view, because he is the most extreme representative of this general philosophical view of the absolute transcendence of God.
Well, the medieval Jewish philosophers, the ones we talked about before, did they, the exception of the Kuzari, would they not have all followed the Rambam in the same path?
No. So Rambam actually critiques his view here, right? He does, he's not so far from it, but he does critique it and thinks we can use language and it does have some meaning and application. So there are people who didn't want to take it as far, and Rambam is probably the most famous. All right, but that's, as I say, it's one view. The other view is more like the view that was the kind of we've just heard, and I've used here Rav Kook to put it forward, right, because he's probably the one who's most studied in the realm of philosophy, and that's the idea that basically, as you were saying, right, look, number one, God is one, right, that he agrees that God's perfect unity is one, but number two, God is infinite. Right? So if God is this one unity and God is infinite, then everything has to be God and everything has to be a perfect unity. Right? That reality is basically God, divine. And therefore says Rav Kook, right? Right? The true reality is basically God, divine. Right? And all existence, our existence, right, the world, everything that kind of comes down from that transcendent God is, as it says here, the Yuridat Haratzon. Right? Now, exactly what that means, basically, as you get further from God, right, you perceive things in more coarse ways, right? And we see things as divided and difference and disagreements and controversy. But for God, it's all kind of a unity. We just don't understand that. And he goes on to say, right? And for all existence to return to kind of divine perfection, right? That's the ultimate teshuvah for him, right? For Rav Kook. So basically, Rav Kook believes God is everything. So actually, right now, right, if we could somehow lift the veil from our eyes, we would see all of existence as a perfect unity, right?
I didn't understand something. So it says, Ki'im Yeridat Ratzon.
Yeah.
In his will, that's a tzimtzum. So when he's ascending, this is a tzimtzum.
Mm-hmm.
His fullness to us,
yes,
that's a tzimtzum.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So he limits himself.
Yeah, so it's kind of the idea of it coming down so that we can deal with it. Yeah, yeah. And, right, and therefore, kind of what's interesting is, despite that, so he thinks, no, God is kind of, here, everywhere. It's just our inability to see it. Right, so it's interesting, that we have this view that, look, reality, olam hazeh, is kind of degraded, olam haba, that some point in time, right, we'll get to. That's true reality. Rav Kook doesn't believe that. Right? Olam haba is right here, right now. If only we could lift the veil and see it. Right? So for him, it's kind of we need a shift in the way we perceive reality. Obviously, the problem is everybody needs to affect the shift at the same time. It's going to be tough. But the point is, it is here for us if we could only see it. Right? So that's very important to him. Every God is right here. Right, with him, not transcendent, right here, right. You see, it's a deeply philosophical song.
Yeah, I'm not allowing my daughter to sing it.
That was like my daughter just got married and they sang that song. Thank you, Hashem. I said, well, he's not paying. It goes on. Right now, Rav Kook does nonetheless agree with Rambam on talking about God. It's interesting, right? He goes on, Kol hagdara be'elohut meveh al yidei kfira. Any attempt to define God is kind of heretical, right? Hadra hi eliliyut ruchan, it's kind of spiritual idolatry, right? And we won't go through the whole quote for the sake of time, but basically, he does agree, we have to understand that when we talk about God, right, we're limiting him, because human concepts are inevitably limiting. Because if you say something as a concept, then everything outside that concept is not part of it, right? So whenever you define things, you're defining it as this and not that. So we have to understand all our attempts to define God are problematic, and we need to get to a more mature understanding. So Rav Kook agrees with that in terms of talk about God. We can't really, speak and understand and comprehend what God is exactly. But for him, he is here, and we just need to come to some... And for Rav Kook, it is a more mystical understanding if we're going to really grasp it. All right? But not everybody goes quite so far. And Yehuda Halevi, who is the great philosophically speaking opponent of the Rambam, says the following. Right, have a look at the bottom here. Although the people believed in the message of Moses, they retained, even after the performance of miracles, some doubt as to whether God really spoke to mortals, and whether the law was not of human origin and only later on supported by divine inspiration. So very interesting. Yehuda Halevi is posing the question, right? And he's basically talking about Mamad Har Sinai. What was the need for Har Sinai? He said, look, the truth is the people, Bnei Israel kind of knew this. Hang on, God's not physical. So how does he speak? Right, how does that happen? So they're kind of unsure, even though he'd done all the miracles, right? Taken them out of, you've had Yetziat Mitzrayim, right? With all the Nissim and Niflaot that are kind of associated with it. But says Yehuda Halevi, they were still, but how does that work if he's not physical? Right?
But it doesn't matter. Speak, or anything else, there is a need for interface, right? So it should be interface whether you interface for communication, right? And that's it. So the communication could be in any form.
It could. But what Yehuda Halevi says here, look what he goes on. They could not associate speech with a divine being since it's something tangible, right? Yeah.
He used speech.
That's what Yehuda Halevi goes on to say. Correct.
We need all the pyrotechnical, the fire,
the
noise, the screaming. What was the purpose?
So this is what Yehuda
cannot just, kind of through osmosis give us era.
Yeah, this is what Yehuda Halevi says, right? He's saying this is what the Bnei Israel thought, right? So they were thinking, hang on, how can this be? And that's why God, however, desired to remove this doubt and commanded them to prepare themselves morally, right? Shlosha Yimei Hagbala, as well as physically, enjoining them to keep aloof from their wives to be ready to hear the words of God. The people prepared and became fitted to receive the divine afflatus, and even to hear publicly the words of God. This came to pass 3 days later, being introduced by overwhelming phenomena, lightning, thunder, earthquake, fire, which surrounded Har Sinai. The people saw the divine writing as they heard the divine words. Right? So Yehuda Halevi totally accepts. Look, I understand there is a philosophical problem here. Right? Sound is a physical phenomenon. God is not a physical thing. How does he create sound? Right? Don't know, but he did. Right? Precisely to allay those doubts. So Yehuda Halevi, and he goes on to say, I've no idea how he did this. I don't know how it happened, but it happened. And that's more important. Right? You can argue all you like, but ultimately experience, right, mass experience, is actually something that trumps argument. Right? I can argue.
Very empirical, very modern.
Oh, he is. Yehuda Halevi is, right? And that's why it's very important to him that Ma'amad Har Sinai is a big public thing, right? He talks about at the beginning of the book, he talks about the resurrection of Jesus and says, that's all very well, but this was 3 grieving old women who'd just seen him die crying, and they thought, it's a heightened state where you can easily, make mistakes hallucinate, but hundreds of thousands of people on a mountain, that you can't hallucinate, right? You don't all have the same hallucination at the same time, right? The very public nature of it is very important to Yehuda Halevi, right?
To focus on the voice and sound. God created the world, right? So what we call physical world.
Yeah.
Right? So he spoke to Adam. They didn't know. It was talking about noise, right?
Mm-hmm.
So God created noise, right? So he moved something. So it was some kind of, again, there's some interface, some kind of physical interaction. So I don't care whether the voice was, it's just vibration of the air, right?
Yeah.
It could be in the range of the wavelength that we could hear, or whatever it is. So it's not important at all.
So if you're going to say, right, that God is entirely non-physical, right, and you want somehow though to have God speak. Right? There is some kind of mystery there about how it can happen, given our understanding.
But then there is a mystery of creating.
Oh, there absolutely is. Yeah, 100%. Of course. But that's the problem. The way Rambam understands creation is similarly going to be very refined in a way that won't allow him to say it. But this is where Rambam and Yehuda Halevi differ. Right? But you have here, therefore, very different views. On the one hand, complete transcendence. On the other hand, no, God is everywhere. And on the one hand, God has no attributes, On the other hand, I know, but he can still speak and he can still do all of that, right? And experience being the proof here.
But again, if the complete transcendence means that God is non-physical, he has nothing to do with physical world, but again, since he created, he obviously doesn't own the physical world.
Right, so
how's the Rambam do
then we get into the creation problem in the Rambam, which is a big question, right? Admittedly. So, but we'll have to defer that one for another time, right? It's a big controversy. And here we get into some of the implications of these different views, right? And they are, significant. So look at the first one. This is the Rambam. Now, in all cases in which the words saying and speaking are applied to God, they are used to denote either will or volition or a notion that's been grasped by the understanding having come from God. The terms in question never signify that he, may he be exalted, spoke using the sounds of letters and a voice. Right? Rambam does not believe that God ever spoke, right? Vayedaber Hashem is to be interpreted non-literally.
If Moshe Rabbeinu never heard God, he just heard the voice in his head.
Right, so then the obvious question, all right, so what was going on with revelation?
It says, "Shamati b'nei Yisrael."
Of course it does, but Rambam doesn't take that. Correct, 100%. Right, yeah.
It's all about dibur.
Yes, but Rambam, the first thing that you have to let go of, right, if you're reading Tanakh al Pi Rambam, is Pshat, right? Genuinely, I'm not being facetious. It's absolutely, right? It's gone, right? And actually, in terms of how Moshe Rabbeinu gets revelation for the Rambam, is we're all of an age where we can understand this example. Maybe not Sachi, I don't know. But do you remember the old radios where you twiddle the knob and you go, and then you'd get perfect, yeah? You remember that, right? The signal's always there, right? It's always beaming, but you've got to tune in, right? According to the Rambam, God is eternally transmitting truth. Eternally. It took Moshe Rabbeinu to be the one who could tune into it, right? So he, so to speak, tuned in to the station so that he could translate for our purposes into the Torah. Right? Now, Yehuda Levi totally rejects that.
It doesn't make sense. Because if Hashem constantly transmitting, he's transmitting a certain sequence of whatever, right? It's not just saying hello, hello, hello.
No.
He keeps on transmitting something.
Truth.
Moshe has conversations with Hashem.
Again.
He's asking questions and answers.
Not according to the Rambam, that's all metaphor. None of that's to be taken literally, right? Genuinely, you can see, right? He says it explicitly. It's not. This isn't hidden. This he says. It never means speak ever. Right? So that, like I say, it's a non-mainstream, very radical view, but it is his view. Now Yehuda Levi totally rejects that, right? This is now Yehuda Levi.
So what is he transmitting at all times?
Truth.
Okay, what does
Ideas.
it mean?
Ideas.
Fine.
The basic principles upon which everything is based, right? That Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who can grasp that and say, that means, right? Okay, it's a very, very non-mainstream view, for sure. And one that you'd have.
It's dangerous because if it's up to our interpretation.
Oh, it's not up to our interpretation. No, it's not.
Up to Moshe's interpretation.
It's not. He's reading it off God. The only person in the one thing that you will note that Rambam says everywhere, Mishnah Torah, Perush on Mishnah, Guide, Moshe's prophecy is unique, right? It's the only one of its kind, right? It is set apart from any other Navi. He is completely on his own, and that's why he was the only one who could do this, and it is unchanging, eternal truth, right? And he says that he kind of everywhere, right? It's very important that he makes that point, right? Yehuda Levi, totally different. Again,
What was Avram? What was Yaakov?
well, again, all of that is tuning into, and the Ahavat are the only people who are on a par with. He literally says in at the end of the guide, in chapter 51 of part 3, right? There are only 4 people who ever attained that level of really direct kind of discourse with God, and it's the Ahavat and Moshe Rabbeinu. Right? He says says it explicitly. Yeah. Yehuda Levi, on the other hand, right, totally rejects this. Right? We say then, says he, we do not know how the intention became corporealized and the speech evolved which struck our ear, nor what new thing God created from naught, nor what existing thing he employed. He does not lack the power. We say he created the 2 tables, tablets, engraved a text on them in the same way as he created heaven and the stars by his will alone. God designed it, they became concrete as he wished. Engraved. This is exactly what you were saying, right? I'm sorry, I don't know your name, sir? Ziv?
Me?
No.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Michael. So he's saying exactly what you were saying, right? Look, I don't know how it happened, right? But there's some interface where God can do this, right? And I'm not, I can't explain it, but hundreds of thousands of people witnessed it. So you can argue till you're blue in the face right? And philosophers like to do that, right? Right? They'll argue till they're blue in the face that, oh, you can't prove this table really exists. I'm like, yeah, all right, but everybody knows it does, so shut up, right? Nobody's convinced by it because of our experience, right?
This argument works much better today because now we disbelieve reason and we believe experience much more.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a zeitgeist.
Yeah, that is a zeitgeist. And for Yehuda Levi, that's what's so unique. And it is unique about Ma'amad Har Sinai, about our revelation.
So it's
a massive, public, empirical, right? Whereas no other one is.
Right. So it's ironic that Yehuda Levi, who
It's
wrote
more
this
modern in a sense.
800 years ago,
Yeah.
he actually was very modern.
Yeah,
thinker.
no, absolutely. It was, right?
So, you know, we look at Rambam, it's like, oh, that's all medieval scholasticism, and like, you know,
Yeah.
Aristotle, who cares?
True. Yehuda Levi is
like,
more,
wow, this
okay,
sounds
that kind
20th
of
century.
thing. Yeah, no, 100%. Right, so therefore, and he's like, yep, this all happens, it's not a problem, and as you see, I do not maintain this is exactly how these things occurred, right? The problem's no doubt too deep for me to fathom, but the result was that everyone who was present at the time became convinced the matter proceeded from God direct, right? And basically, for him, and again, big difference, the only person who heard anything at Har Sinai, heard anything, is Moshe Rabbeinu, according to Rambam. No. According to the Rambam, even Moshe Rabbeinu, and even in the Pshat, right? The first two commandments, and the other 8, right? Yeah. But for him, even the first two, no, they didn't hear anything articulate. Only Moshe Rabbeinu could hear the actual Anochi. They just heard something scary and didn't know what was going and ran away, right? Whereas the Yehuda Levi, no. Every single person there heard the words, right? For him, everyone heard the words. So you've got these very different views of God and how he relates to us through these two thinkers. And we're kind of out of time. But one other very interesting implication of all of this, and I'll just do this outside because it's here, right, is actually to do with the nature of Hebrew. Lashon HaKodesh, Hebrew. Right? What is Lashon HaKodesh? Well, for Yehuda Levi, it's the actual language that God spoke. Right? It's really holy. Not from the Rambam. God doesn't speak. Right? So for Rambam, Lashon HaKodesh just, and he says again explicitly in the guide, what does it mean Lashon HaKodesh? It means it doesn't have words for disgusting things. It's a Lashon Naki, right? It's a clean, pure language. But it doesn't have any magical, mystical holiness to it. It's holy because it's the language of the Tanakh, and we treat it, therefore, with the respect it's due. But it's just a language, right?
It's not different.
It's no different. But for Yehuda Levi, no, it's the language God spoke, right? It's real holy. And that's kind of, you see here, right, at the bottom here, this Yehuda Levi, where he says, look, there's a language created by God, and that's a holy language. Whereas the Rambam, right, at the top here, languages are conventional and not natural, as has sometimes been taught.
In other words,
right? And here, I do have it here, right? I will give the reason why our language is called holy should not be thought, this is on our part an empty appellation or mistake. It's true, for the holy language has no words for the male or female organ, copulation, etc. And then in terms halachically, therefore, right, in Mishneh Torah, it says, well, therefore you can use Lashon HaKodesh when you're in the bathroom. Right? You can't take Tanakh in there, but you can talk about Divrei Chol in Lashon HaKodesh.
and
In
but
the
Rabbi
bathroom.
would argue with that. I mean, in Halacha we do accept the psak.
But in terms of using Lashon HaKodesh
Yeah, you are
as opposed
allowed
to
to use-
Hebrew.
Right. No, you are allowed
Right.
to use Lashon Kodesh in the bathroom.
Right.
Right. Even those who would subscribe to Rabbi Yehuda
Right,
Levi's
so I
Lashon
wonder.
Kodesh,
I wonder. So
still-
Yehuda Levi never wrote halachic works, so we'll never know.
But
But yeah, no, that's
those who
correct.
hold his philosophy
Correct.
also
Correct.
hold
Yeah,
psak.
absolutely. Though the other thing, look what in terms of Hilchot Kriyat Shema, right, that you can read it in any language, right, and again, that's something that is not unique to Rambam. But his thing is, you've got to be medakdek on the language, whatever language is, right? So we have, various things where we have to be very careful that the words don't slip into each other when saying Shema. Rambam says, yeah, that's true if you're using English as well, right? It's all kind of a piece. It's very interesting, right? That this does have certain implications for conceptions of, for example, holiness. What is it to be holy, right? So for Yehuda Levi, it's real.
It's the kavana of the word, so it's translated from Hebrew to English, to Arabic, to whatever it is. It's the kavana behind it. Similar to
What do you mean, the kavanah behind when
what
you
does
say?
it mean, Shema? Shema Yisrael, Hashem, Echad, Yachid u'Miuchad. Probably he's meaning, I don't know, I'm asking. Maybe he means...
Who's he?
Rambam.
Yeah. Oh, Rambam,
The
yeah.
Kavanah of what the words means is what, what's important. It's
Yeah,
not
okay, 100%.
words.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Yes,
Because the words
absolutely.
are not Kodesh,
Correct,
but the Kavanah is Kodesh.
but it goes even
Similar
further.
to the Unkulus, that they say that Unkulus Hatargum is what Hashem meant,
Right.
not what is written.
Rambam loves Unkelus, right? Because Unkelus also translates words to get rid of any sort of corporeality.
Right.
And he cites Unkelus all the time, saying he
Except in
kind
a
of
few
got it.
places.
Yeah. Oh no, there are places where, and he
In
doesn't
dreams.
accept. He doesn't agree with Unkelus on that, but he does think that he was very important in making that shift, right? But in terms of implications and holiness, right? So a big difference between Yehuda Levi and the Rambam on this is the following.
Sorry, but if we believe that all the laws in this world, right? I mean, laws of nature,
Yeah.
gravity, whatever.
Yeah.
And actually, as well, the laws for society, because
Yeah, yeah,
whatever
yeah.
we try to do by ourselves, nothing really works,
Correct.
right? So again, it's in a way how Hashem is communicating with us, establish everything for us. The same way, probably for communication, he would have some kind of language, the way he would talk to us. And then gematria would make sense. Otherwise, gematria doesn't make any sense.
Right, so for the Rambam, gematria is
Right, exactly.
doesn't
I was
make
gonna
any
say
sense. Yes, that's true, right? Yeah.
Again, I'm saying if we believe that there are laws of nature that were established by Hashem, right? Laws of everything,
Yeah.
then it should be also some way of communicating with us, with people here. So in this,
There is no. So for both of them, there is God communicated, the Torah to us.
right.
The question
Right,
is
the language-
how, right?
But then it makes sense to have a way to describe it in this language.
Yeah, of
I guess
course.
the question
Absolutely.
is asking is according to Rambam, was the choice of Lashon Kodesh as a vehicle of communication incidental, or
Yeah.
it had to be that way?
No, it's because of the time it happened. Imagine Moshe Rabbeinu lived today in America.
So going to Rambam,
It would have been
Torah written
English.
right?
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. So the Rambam
Yes,
is
correct.
Halevi, it had to be Lashon Kodesh.
Correct.
Because that's the
No,
language
that
paid for it.
is a language
Right,
that
but according-
describes
right,
things
according to Rambam,
in
it
their
happened to be-
essence. Yeah.
It happened to be the
Correct.
Jews. That's what the Jews spoke. So he had to
Correct.
spoke in the language they understood.
Correct. And that in terms of the holiness idea,
So that's
right,
why
and
the-
how they differ.
So that's why the Rambam would have no question why the Gemara is in Aramaic, because
Correct. Yeah, go on, right. It was the language at the time. Sure.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah.
the way I understand things is that according to the Rambam, God is transcendent and God is mechav hametziot.
Yeah.
It has to exist. I mean, if you go, to the first creation, who created everything? God. So God is mechav hametziot. Now, everything except God is just an instrument. The ultimate goal is God. The language, the tashmishei kedusha, the whole instrument to serve God, but they're actually meaningless. I mean, they're just nothing besides an instrument. Also, it's like a big thing about the land of Israel nowadays.
Right. So this is the perfect example, right? Imagine
Right,
I go to Yerushalayim and I bring back a clump of earth from Yerushalayim, and I go outside here, Fair Lawn, and nothing
Holy
against
earth.
Fair Lawn, and I take a clump of earth, right? And I've got here is my
Holy Earth.
Yerushalayim, and here is Fair Lawn, right? Now I want you to imagine, and this is a simile that's been used by a couple of writers, and it's helpful. So you have a Geiger counter, right? And that measures radioactivity, right? And if you put it next to something radioactive, it clicks, because radioactivity is a real property of something, right? So according to Yehuda Levi, that earth from Jerusalem is holy, and that earth from Fair Lawn isn't. So if I created a holiness counter, a Kedusha counter, and I pointed it there, it would click. And if I pointed it there, it would do nothing. According to Rambam, it wouldn't click either way. It's just earth, right? The earth from Israel is holy. Why? Because that is the chosen land, right? That is our land, and therefore it's holy, and it's the place we are meant to be and do the mitzvot, blah, 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 blah. But holiness is to do with how we treat it, not a property, some kind of strange mystical
Not so
property.
that I agree with that
it
then,
has.
because it's the
Oh, no.
property is Eretz Israel is the confine of the limit that Hashem said. So he says,
Yeah. Yeah.
So he actually defined the word.
Once you
that
take the soil out,
holiness
it loses
it's not
holiness.
the earth. It's the avir shel Eretz Israel.
Oh, fine,
Right. You could argue that
Yeah,
even
yeah, yeah.
Yehuda Halevi.
Oh, okay, but no, Yehuda Halevi really,
It's
sure.
the physical space that is holy.
So that's a
Not the
different.
stones and
So that's a different view. As in, Yehuda Halevi really thinks, no, the land is holy, right? There are, and he explains it by saying, look, we all know, right? Just again, empirically, right? There are certain soils that will grow beautiful vines for wine, and others that won't. We know they're superior, right?
But does he refer to the soil itself, or refers just to the place?
No, the actual physical land.
But that's what I'm saying. But
Definitely.
you can understand physical land not in terms of the actual clumps of
Dirt.
earth, but
Right.
the place. The
Well, I'm not sure what that means. What do you mean by the place? So the place, if no one was in it doing anything, would still be holy?
Yeah, it would. No, it would.
Fine. So I'll bring air
It's the
back
confines of
instead.
No, not there. No. It's not that.
Then bring all the dirt you want to me.
No. So what is it though? What is that? Avir is not a thing unless it's air.
No, whatever. If you say it is, whatever is found within the boundaries of Israel has kedusha. You take it out,
Yes.
it loses kedusha.
Whatever's in has kedusha, and you take it out, it loses. Oh, okay. So, but again, then you're saying there is a real property, and it loses that property. That's still Yehuda Levi, not Rambam.
Let me
Right.
ask you this
I
question.
take soil from Fair Lawn and bring it to Jerusalem.
Does it then become holy?
Yes.
No.
Becomes
Oh,
back-
okay,
becomes
fine.
back to the-
Fine. No, but that's Yehuda Levi, not
I
Rambam.
don't think that the dirt is what becomes holy. It's
No,
not
there
the
does
dirt.
become holy.
It's
Yes,
not the
kedusha.
stones
So
and
what?
sticks.
But so then I'm very
It's the
unclear
space.
what
Let
do you mean by the space?
Let me
The
simplify that.
confine, the borders is what makes it.
The
defines it
coordinates on the map.
holy. Yes.
Okay.
Because if you
Fine.
know, Syria,
Yeah.
you know, during the time of David HaMelech,
Mm-hmm.
so it extended, you know, the geographic space for I don't know what is it Orla. For example.
Yeah.
All those, you know, all those laws that we have. That
That's
are
why it's
related
holy
to
for the Rambam,
agriculture.
right?
Yeah. So it happened, you know.
Yeah.
So they extended the space, but the space is the holiness.
Oh, okay.
It's not the actual material.
Fine. Okay. Either way, Rambam disagrees, right? As in Yehuda Levi thinks, yeah, okay, whether it's space, soil, but I don't think it's space for Yehuda Levi. I think it's much
Let me
more
just
than that.
simplify it. That's
Because he does talk about climate and soil. He literally talks about the soil, the land, right? So I think he goes, he would believe the soil bit, but even if not, and we go with the coordinates on the
So
map,
on that mishkal, on the same.
they
on the same level.
disagree.
So Shnat Shemitah.
Yeah.
So you take now dirt,
Mhm.
massive amount of
Yeah.
dirt from Israel.
Yeah.
Put it in Fair Lawn now.
Yeah.
Are you and I'm gonna grow whatever?
Right,
Am I allowed
right.
to cultivate, you know, that land?
Of course not.
No. Of course I'm allowed to.
Right,
cultivate.
yeah.
It's now America. It's not Israel anymore.
Fine.
You could say
Fine.
it's bottle.
Yeah. But it's still kind of the point stands because we can make it about something else, right? Any kind of object that we treat with reverence as holy, right? Is it because it actually has some kind of property, or is it just to do with the use of it?
Torah.
because you-
Torah, exactly.
Anything that
Torah's
Hashem
just a
made.
parchment,
because you
right?
can-
According to Rambam, we treat it's holy
Is it the Chefzer
because
Gavra?
exactly it's exactly that though. It's Chefzer Gavra,
It's an
right?
instrument.
For Halevi, it's the
It's a
Gavra,
Gavra.
right?
No, for you it's a
But
Chefzer.
sorry, yeah. But
saying it's a Gavra.
Rambam is no,
What's
it's not.
Gavra means a person, or the subject object. Gavra is a subject. In other words, for Rabbi Yehuda Levi, this sefer is holy because it is holy.
Yeah.
And therefore I have to treat it with holiness. Whereas according to Rambam, the sefer is just the book, but I have an obligation and all of us to treat it with holiness, which is what
Correct.
makes it holy.
Yeah, but not because it has the property of holiness,
Right.
right?
No one?
It is holy,
That's right.
right? But the way it's holy is very different, right?
Step outside of Judaism.
Mm.
Someplace, somebody was born in a village of ABC, right? Where his parents, grandparents, whatever. Now this person lives in Fair Lawn. He goes there, he brings the soil from the grave of his parents. For him, this soil is holy, it has meaning.
Right, because it has been
but
correct,
that- no,
right?
we don't, no, but that's a
His
subjective meaning. That's
attitude
different.
about this soil is different.
That's subjective meaning.
But that's the same what we have here. It just we are talking about
It is,
Right,
but
right.
but its holiness here derives from something that comes from God. So that's very different, right? So it's still very different because it comes from because God told us we had to do that, right?
All right. So I have just one last question.
Yeah.
Here, this whole disagreement on transcendence and immanence and so on. Can we, now again, I'm not trying to say that that's what the Rambam would say, but can we not resolve it by saying that really Rambam and the Rambam and the Yeshiva are just talking from two different points of view? In other words, if you look, for example, in the, I think that Achim makes this point, right? In other words, if you think about God himself, then Rambam certainly is right.
Yeah.
Right? If you look all the way
yeah.
you look at God from God's point of view, so to speak, then the Rambam is right.
Yeah.
If you look at God from our point of view, which is what we have to do, then everyone is right. So it's not really so much a machlokes as much as a different perspective.
It's true, but the Rambam does use it to put certain strictures on what we should believe in a way that you could be much more comfortable with us believing. So it does kind of go a bit beyond. I think there's an extent to which that's true. I mean, the truth is, I don't like either of these views, and I go with something else altogether, which is more Rav Soloveitchik, which is the last quote, but we don't have time. And it's something that I'm working on developing further from what Rav Soloveitchik says, right? So I think that this whole dichotomy between the two of them is they're both wrong. But, there are other views, and that's always the case in kind of...
But that's what I'm saying, because as I hear this, it seems to me that it's not really so much as just, like that, different perspectives.
Yeah.
Right? In other words, I believe Hamerkaz discusses this. He says that from God's point of view, every place is equally holy, equally the same.
Right.
There's nothing more special about than any place in the world. But from our point of view, it's certainly not like that.
Right. There's something to that, but I think that if you put them in a room together, they would genuinely disagree with each other on what, therefore, you can truly say about God and what you can't.
No, I understand, but I'm saying, but I think we can...
Potentially.
There's a way to harmonize it by saying that there's really just they're talking about two different...
On this particular issue, potentially, because Yud HaLevi does kind of, say the same thing about reinterpreting words about God in the Kuzari, right? He just goes with, he's willing to just say, look, I know we don't understand it, but look, it happened and that's an end of it. Whereas Rambam does, there is a real difference. And Rambam says, you know what, he never spoke, so there are real differences.
Rambam says you should not think of it from our point of view, you should think of it from his point of view. Because we don't have to do that.
Which is tough.
Exactly. We can just think about it as we do, as long as you understand that it's actually not exactly true.
No, exactly. He's more willing to go with I know we don't really understand what we're saying, but we can say it and it's fine. Rather than no, don't say it. So there's a kind of more than that, the literal truth of Yadaber Hashem Moshe Lemor. They really differ on that. So that's pretty substantial.
But is there anybody who tries to harmonize them like this?
No one seriously tries to harmonize them, I don't think.
Or at least, those two perspectives.
Yeah, not really. No.
Because
they are. There are people who would try, but in most of the people who kind of study this stuff in particular, as in the philosophies of them, they just say no. They had different views, but Yud HaLevi's view led him to go to Shacharis in the morning, and Rambam's view led him to go to Shacharis in the morning. So that's where it's kind of comes out in the wash.
Next week is about free will.
And, next week's much easier. Free will and divine knowledge and that stuff. Yeah.
Okay. If you want about the last line of this word.
Which one?
May one comprehend God instead of comprehending Him.
Yes, this is the Rav Soloveitchik line, which I like a lot.
What is Him?
Right. Well, so this is the thing. He's saying, you know what? I can't explain to you because I can't comprehend, but I can relate to God emotionally through imagination without pretending what I'm saying is true. Right? But what's it about? It's about relationship. Right? And a relationship can come about through tefillah, even if it's not literally true. Right? As in, I can build a relationship. Think about.
Very postmodern.
Think about. It's not, because he's saying it's. Here's a mashal, right? If you watch a movie and you cry, it's not true, but it engages your emotion. You relate to those people, right? And sometimes those movies are about true events, even though it's not the true representation of the event, right? That, I think, is what Rav Soloveitchik said, right? There's a real God, and we can't know literal truths about him, but he's given us access to relate to him the same way you have fictional representations of true stories, right? And those engage our emotions, right? This is literally my next book about this fictional thing, right? They scare us, even though, right, horror movies or whatever. And it's quite good. There are things about God in Tanakh that are scary, right? It's good to have a bit of fear. That's what they say modern orthodoxy is not so good at, right? So maybe if we understand it that way, we get the fear back into it. And the love, right? And the wow and all of that by looking at it kind of aesthetically, more through imagination than intellect.
Well, it's interesting because, again, Rabbeinu Bachya in Kollel of Fair Lawn, he starts with the Shiur Hashem in a very philosophical way. He talks about how you cannot understand these things literally. We actually don't have any words to describe God, and he has a whole long chapter on the three things which is not, but usually it's all one.
Then it becomes more practical.
But then he talks about Ahavat, what you have to feel.
100%.
So that's what I'm saying. So
And Rav Soloveitchik is more closer to that.
You know, he spends the whole first chapter saying, like, this is what you have to think. But then ignore all that and feel something else.
Right. Yeah.
But it's not really ignore. It's you know, so this is how.
Yeah. It's a kind of it's a like way of conducing to some kind. I think Rav Soloveitchik, that's sort of his view. So he wouldn't accept either of these, right? He'd have a very different way of how.
Can you put Rabbeinu Bachya into the next one?
Relate. What's another one? The free will thing. I'm not sure.
He discusses the free will.
Yeah, there's free will there. So I'll see. Maybe.
You'll see. Well, but it's interesting.
All right, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
It's interesting because maybe that's why I'm coming, because I spent a lot of time during the